The horizon burned orange as the sun sank behind the jagged peaks. The wind swept across the dry plain, stirring dust that swirled like restless spirits. In the distance, a lone figure moved slowly, each step deliberate, kicking up the coarse sand of the abandoned ranch trail. His hat was battered, coat frayed, boots cracked from years of relentless travel. He was a man who had seen too much, someone who carried silence like a second skin. Samuel Harker. The rancher had lived this way for years, isolated, wary, haunted by memories he refused to name. The land had given him everything and taken more. His cattle had been his family once, his horses his companions. But now, all that remained were echoes of footsteps in empty corrals and the hiss of wind through broken fences. As he rode toward the distant ridge, the stillness of the land pressed against him like a living thing. There was a heaviness in the air, not the calm of peace, but the quiet before something terrible. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, not out of expectation, but habit. Years of surviving men and nature alike had taught him that danger often arrived silently. That was when he saw her, a young girl, barely older than 12, hung limply from a tree at the edge of the dry creek. Her small hands were tied with rough rope, her feet dangling above the cracked earth. A crude wooden sign was nailed to the trunk. "White men don't forgive." For a moment, Samuel's breath caught in his chest. He stared at the girl, at the lifeless sway of her body in the wind, the cruel message staring back at him. The world seemed to pause. The wind slowed. The distant crows halted mid-flight. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of anger, grief, and something he had buried long ago, a deep, unyielding need to act. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the dust. His eyes scanned the horizon. No one. No tracks. Only the echo of a cruel jest left for him to find. The girl's face was hidden beneath a mass of dark hair, but he could see the tremor in her shoulders, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, just barely. Samuel approached cautiously, every instinct screaming that the world was trying to test him, to see if he had the courage left to intervene. He knelt beside her, his fingers working quickly to cut the ropes with his pocket knife. The rope burned his skin, the rough fibers biting into his palms. He ignored it. He always ignored pain if it meant saving someone else. When the girl finally sagged into his arms, tears streaked his weathered face. He held her gently, feeling the weight of her frailty against his own exhaustion. Her eyes fluttered open, a storm of fear and defiance mirrored in her gaze. Samuel met her stare, seeing a reflection of the world's cruelty. And in that instant, he understood something terrifying. Saving her would mean entering the storm he had spent years avoiding. The girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. He said, "White men don't forgive." Samuel nodded, though he didn't speak. Words were useless here. Instead, he lifted her carefully onto his horse, securing her behind him. She held on to him with the fierce grip of survival, and together they began the ride back to the ranch he still called home. Though it had been more prison than sanctuary for years, the ride was silent, but the land itself seemed to react. Wolves howled in the distance. The air thickened with the scent of rain and smoke, and the wind carried whispers that might have been warnings. Every step forward was a choice, one he knew could cost them both their lives. To the ranch. The door creaked as he entered. Dust lay thick over the furniture, the remnants of meals eaten alone, and the silence pressed down on them like a shroud. He placed the girl gently on the floor, offering her water from the rusted basin. She drank quickly, almost mechanically, eyes darting to every corner, every shadow as he watched her. In those moments, he realized that the girl was not only fragile, but fierce. There was a spark in her, anger, resilience, defiance, that mirrored something he had long thought dead in himself. He had saved her body, but the journey to save her spirit would be far more perilous. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the scent of distant fires. Samuel knew that someone had left her like this as a warning. The frontier had teeth, and it never forgave weakness. He looked down at the girl. and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. If she survived tonight, perhaps there was a chance for both of them. But the world beyond the ranch was a cruel one, and the storm was just beginning. The morning sun clawed its way over the jagged horizon, casting long, trembling shadows across the desolate valley. The rancher, whose name was Elias, trudged along a scorched trail, the weight of the young Apache girl's small, limp body and his arms pressing into his soul. Her breathing was shallow, barely audible over the whispering wind that carried the scent of dust, blood, and smoke that he hadn't spoken since the discovery. Words felt fragile here, inadequate against the raw, aching truth of the world. The sign had burned itself into his memory. White men don't forgive. Those words weren't just a warning. They were judgment. Elias had lived by a code, yet now he realized the code had failed her. The wilderness itself seemed against him. The once gentle creek was swollen with runoff from a sudden spring storm. Trees groaned and snapped under gusts that tore at their branches. Each step he took was a battle. The mud sucked at his boots like the hands of 1,000 ghosts. Every now and then, a raven would circle overhead, its cry sharp and accusatory, as if asking him how he could let this happen. Hours passed. He found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, its jagged mouth like a frozen scream. The girl's eyes fluttered open once, a greenish-brown haze of pain and fear. She murmured something in Apache, and though he didn't understand the words, the tremor in her lips made him shiver. He brushed a hand through her tangled hair, feeling the wet strands stick to his palm. Night fell with a suffocating quiet. Elias set the girl down gently and began a small fire, the flames painting his scarred face in orange and gold. That's when he saw the shadow moving at the edge of the clearing. Not quite human, not quite animal, just a flicker. "Who's there?" he called, voice low and cautious. The shadow hesitated, then stepped into the light. She was old, older than the wilderness seemed to allow, a woman wrapped in tattered blankets, eyes sharp as obsidian. She carried a staff carved from driftwood, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to pulse in the firelight. "You saved her," the woman said, her voice rough but steady. "Or you tried." Elias blinked. "Who are you?" "Call me Tala, if you must call me anything," she replied. "I've walked these lands longer than men care to measure, longer than the lore remembers. And I've learned survival is about more than bullets." The fire crackled. Elias didn't know whether to trust her, but the girl's shallow breathing demanded allies. Tala knelt beside the fire and studied the girl, her fingers gentle as she checked the pulse. "She's hurt worse than you know," she murmured. "And the men who left her will come looking. The ones who wrote that sign. White men don't forgive, they hunt more than flesh. They hunt fear and vengeance." Elias clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms. The rage that had been dormant since the war surged back, a tide threatening to sweep him into recklessness. You want to track those men down, make them pay. Yet Tala's gaze held him, steady and unnerving. "Control it," she said. "A moment's fury can kill the girl faster than their guns ever could."